Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to filter out the noise and just get to the essential nuggets of knowledge and get there fast.
hmm
Today, we are tackling something that's not just linguistic, but deeply, deeply cultural. We're mastering the Japanese self-introduction, the Jikushukai.
That's right. And this is for anyone looking for that, that structured but culturally aware shortcut into foundational Japanese.
Exactly. The kind of vocabulary you'd need for daily life, for school, the office, or even those really high-stakes first meetings like a job interview.
Yeah, and we're basically looking at a lesson plan for an absolute beginner, but we're going to pull out some of the more advanced cultural implications.
Right. The goal isn't just learning what to say, it's understanding why the language is structured the way it is, why it forces you to choose certain words in certain contexts.
And that distinction, between formal and informal speech, it's baked in from the very first word you choose. It's not an afterthought.
So the structure of a Jikushukai is almost like a map of social expectations.
It is. If you get the opening words and the pronouns right, you're signaling immediately that you get it, that you respect the culture. So we'll be navigating all of it: pronouns, suffixes, jobs, nationality.
The whole toolkit.
The whole toolkit, yeah. So that by the end of this, you can make a really confident first impression.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Part 1, the core self. This is all about establishing your identity and that initial social contract. And it really starts with two phrases that you just can't separate.
The first one, the most essential opening, is hajime mashite.
Which translates sort of roughly as how do you do, or maybe we are beginning something now.
Precisely. It's the standard opener. Think of it like it's the ceremonial first step. If you skip it, you look rushed.
A bit dismissive, maybe.
Exactly. Dismissive of the formality of the whole thing. It's like the verbal equivalent of a proper bow or a handshake. You're signaling that you recognize this moment is important.
Okay, so that's the opening shot. But the phrase that really does all the heavy lifting, the one that kind of seals the deal, that's a closing statement, right?
Yes. Duzo yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
And this is a phrase we really need to spend some time on because the simple translation, nice to meet you, is, well, it's just not enough, is it?
It's deeply misleading. This phrase is the absolute linchpin of the whole self-introduction.
Okay, let's unpack it then. This relational contract. We know it's more than just a pleasantry. It's looking forward.
It's entirely forward-looking. I mean, if you break it down, duzo is like please or kindly. Yorikiku means something like favorably or properly. And then onegai shimasu is a polite request form, like I request this.
So if you put all of that together, what are you actually saying to the other person?
You're saying, please look favorably upon me, or maybe I humbly request that you treat me well in the relationship we're starting now. Wow. In a business setting, you are literally putting yourself in their care. You're asking for a good, respectful relationship moving forward. The source material is dead on here. You have to memorize this, and you have to say it with sincerity.
And I'm guessing the tone of voice matters a lot, too. You have to say it with a certain seriousness.
Oh, absolutely. It should come with the right bow or even just a small nod in a more casual setting because you're acknowledging you're committing to that social contract. If you just mumble it or rush through it, you're cheapening the whole promise.
That really sets the foundation. Okay, so once the contract is signed, so to speak, we need to know who's actually speaking. Let's get into the basic personal pronouns, starting with I.
The standard, most reliable one you're going to use is watashi.
And this is the polite form, right? Safe for pretty much any situation, office, school, whatever, for men and women.
Correct. Watashi is your universal standard. Now, for the learner, it's important to know it's not the only way to say I. Men, for example, have options like boku.
Which is a bit softer, more informal.
Yeah, and then there's or, which is very casual, masculine, and can sometimes sound a bit rough.
But for our purposes here, navigating formal introductions, the advice is crystal clear. Stick with watashi.
Always, 100%. Until you are an absolute master of the social context, watashi is your default. It's always the right choice. Using or in a job interview, for instance, that would be a disaster.
Right, a huge signal that you don't understand the situation.
A total lack of awareness, yeah.
And what about the group? The plural is pretty simple, isn't it?
It is. It's wachitachi. It means we. You just add that plural marker, tachi, onto the end.
Simple enough, it keeps that polite feel from the original watashi.
Exactly.
Okay, now we get to what I think is one of the first big cultural hurdles for learners from, say, the West, the word for you. The source gives us anata.
Yes, and technically anata does mean you. But, and this is a huge but, every single learner has to internalize this. It's a word that proficient Japanese speakers often go out of their way to avoid.
Why is that so important? I mean, if the word exists, why not just use it?
Because using anata to directly address someone, it can be really problematic. Culturally, it can feel a bit distant, maybe even disrespectful, or depending on your tone, it can sound a little accusatory.
So it's like you're pointing a finger at them.
A little bit, yeah. When you use anata, it highlights the fact that you haven't bothered to learn their name or their title, or maybe that you see yourself as being above them, like you're talking down to them.
So what's the workaround? Let's say I'm in a high-pressure meeting and I completely blank on my colleague's name. What do? I can't just stand there in silence.
Right, and that's the exact scenario you need to be ready for. The safer thing to do is, first, always try to use the person's name plus an honorific, Suzuki-san.
Okay.
If you've truly lost the name in that moment, the next best thing is to use their title if you know it, like sensei for a teacher or shachu for a CEO.
Well, what if I don't know the name or the title? Is there another option, or is it better to just not use a subject in the sentence at all?
Omission is the master skill here. That's the advanced move. Japanese sentences often drop the subject when it's obvious from the context. So instead of saying, anata wa nani oshitemasu ka? What are you doing? You just ask, nani oshitemasu ka?
What are doing?
Exactly. The person you're talking to knows you're addressing them. That's a sophisticated, polite way to handle it without using that kind of invasive pronoun.
That is a profoundly important tip. So the hierarchy is name, then title, and then just drop it completely. Anata is like the emergency brake, not the steering wheel.
Perfect analogy. Exactly. You only really use it when you're talking to your spouse, maybe, or if you're absolutely sure of the context. But for formal introductions, just avoid it like the plague.
And this focus on status and politeness naturally extends to talking about other people, right? The third person, introducing that person.
Yes, and here we immediately see that politeness gradient again. Our sources give us two options. The standard kind of general one is anusi, anuthu.
That person.
And then we have the more polite elevated option, manokata.
Also that person, but formal. So why is this distinction so important even when the person you're talking about isn't even in the room?
Because the language is constantly forcing you to filter everything you say through a lens of respect for the subject, even if they're not there. By choosing anokata, you're signaling to the person you are talking to that you recognize the social standing of the person you're describing.
Ah, so it's a courtesy to your listener.
It is. It shows them you're culturally sensitive, that you're aware of the social hierarchy that exists even outside of your immediate conversation.
So if I'm talking to my boss and we're discussing the new CEO from another department, using anohito would be, well, it will be disrespectful to the CEO, but also sort of disrespectful to my boss because I'm not using the proper decorum.
That is a perfect analysis. It proves that respect in a Japanese conversation is like an overall atmosphere. It's not just a direct line between you and the listener. Using anokata sets a high tone of formality for the whole interaction.
This structural need to map out relationships brings us perfectly to part 2, social structure. And this is where we get into the honorifics that define those relationships, where status is literally woven into the name.
Right. The name suffixes are completely foundational, and we have to start with the most universal, the safest option of all.
San, the one everyone knows. Mr., Miss, Mrs., Miss.
San is your safest bet in, almost every single scenario when you're talking to someone outside your very, very close circle. It's gender neutral. You can attach it to the family name.
Which is most common.
Most common, yeah. Or the first name, though usually you stick to the family name unless you're invited to do otherwise. It's just a baseline of respect.
It's the linguistic equivalent of a black suit. It's always appropriate.
Well said.
So when a learner is practicing this, how do they smoothly ask for someone's name and then introduce other people?
If you need to ask for a name, the polite way is onamai wa. And you might notice that little o prefix on nemai, the word for name. That's an honorific prefix, making the word itself more polite.
And for introducing someone else, we use that standard template. We see an kochira wa san desu, meaning this is Mr. Mrs. name.
That template is your best friend.
Yeah.
It establishes who the person is and immediately shows you're being polite by using san. It's professional, it's smooth, it just works.
Okay, now let's move into the honorifics that signal something more specific. Closeness, or more importantly, hierarchy. This is where the cultural landmines start for a beginner.
Let's start with chan. You hear this a lot. It's used for children, babies, and very close friends.
Right. It has that feeling of affection, maybe even a bit of cuteness.
Absolutely. It softens the name. It's mainly for young girls or pets or between very close female friends. But the critical warning for a non-native speaker is this. If you use chan for a boss, or an older person, or a colleague you don't know extremely well,
Hmm.
you're basically signaling that you think they're childish or that they're your subordinate. You're taking an intimacy that has not been offered. It's a huge social mistake.
So, for the learner trying to get by in an office or university, hands should be locked away.
Unless you're talking to a toddler, yes. And the same rule applies, maybe a little less severely, for kun.
Kun, used mainly for boys or male juniors.
Right. Kun is a marker of junior status. A teacher will use it for their male students, or a male boss might use it for his younger male employees. It's critically a downward relationship. The senior addresses the junior.
So if a male colleague calls you kun, they're kind of establishing that they're your senior, your senpai.
Exactly. And if you then use kun for them, you're inappropriately trying to assert superiority. It's a power move that will backfire.
So the very existence of chan and kun just proves that the first thing you have to do in a Japanese conversation is figure out the relationship. You can't even speak properly until you know where you stand.
That is the structural takeaway. These suffixes aren't just little titles. They are mandatory social markers. They signal your awareness of the distance and the hierarchy. And misusing them isn't just a language mistake. It's a social violation.
And that structure, that sense of identity and distance, it also applies when we talk about identity on a bigger scale, right? Like nationality, with the suffix, right? Jin.
Yep, jin is the nationality suffix. It's really straightforward and super versatile. It just means person of. And we see the example in the source, Nihonjin, a Japanese person.
Before we jump into jobs, let's expand on this for a second. If I've just said I'm, say, America Jin, what's the next logical step in that conversation about origin?
That's a great point. So jin confirms your nationality, but the next step is often to ask about your shushin, which means origin or hometown.
Ah, so it's more specific.
Much more specific. You'd often hear it with the question word doko, which means where.
So instead of just asking Nanijin desuka, what nationality are you? A more natural follow-up would be Shushin wa doko desuka.
Where are you from? Or what's your origin? Precisely. And it lets you take the conversation beyond a simple one-word answer and get into geography, which is way more interesting. It just shows how these basic building blocks quickly lead to more engaging chats.
That's a great tip, and it sets us up perfectly for part 3, defining status occupations and workplace vocabulary. And this is where we really run headfirst into the language's built-in demand for humility.
This section reveals probably the most profound linguistic rule of Japanese politeness. We start with the common term for a master or instructor, sensei.
Right, used for teachers, doctors, professors, politicians, anyone in a respected position of knowledge.
And when you're addressing someone else who is a teacher, you absolutely use sensei. However, and this is the big caveat from our source material, sensei is not used when you're referring to your own job.
This is that mandatory linguistic switch. If you yourself are a teacher, you have to refer to your profession with the humble term kyushi.
And this is completely non-negotiable in a formal introduction. The sensei versus kyushi split is a perfect example of conjugo, or humble language, that's literally built into the vocabulary. You have to elevate others, but you must lower your own status.
I get the rule, but let's push on that a little. Is it truly absolute? What if a teacher is talking to a student's parent or some other person from outside the school? Is there ever a time where, to sort of maintain the authority of the school, they might refer to themselves as sensei?
That's a really sophisticated question. It gets into the whole uchi in-group versus soto out-group dynamic. But generally, no. Even when talking to a parent, an outsider, the focus is on the school's reputation, not the individual's title. The self-referential term kyushi is still the standard way to state your role while maintaining that necessary humility.
But that same teacher would probably refer to their principal as sensei when talking to the parent.
Oh, absolutely. They would elevate the rank of their superior, but they must still use the self-deprecating term kyushi for themselves. The rule is just relentless. When you talk about yourself or your in-group, you use humble language. When you talk about the person you're speaking to or their group, you use honorific language. That sensei kyushi split is the master template for this entire humility system.
That is a critical insight. Self-deprecation isn't a choice, it's an active, required feature of the language. Okay, let's look at some other key occupations a learner needs.
For a student, the term is pretty straightforward. Gakusei.
And for someone working in, a general company setting.
That would be kaishin, a company employee.
And from that, we can pull out the key component shein, which just means employee. That seems like a really useful suffix.
It is. For example, a bank employee becomes unshro, ginkuin. It combines ginku for bank with in, which is part of that shein group, meaning a member or employee.
So to give our listener a little more to work with beyond just shein, are there other common ways that professional roles are constructed?
That's a great question, yeah. You can look for the suffix shi, which is often used for certified professionals. Think lawyers, accountants, architects. A lawyer, for instance, is a bengoshi. That shi at the end signals a highly qualified, licensed status.
What about for specialists who might not have a specific certification like that, but are focused in a certain field?
Well, you might see components like ka, or even the word senmonka, which just means specialist. For example, while the source gives us the loan word ingenia for engineer, a salesperson might have a very specific title within their company. Just knowing that these different building blocks exist helps you decode new titles you come across.
Right. So getting back to our list, we have that common loan word, Kanji's ingenia for engineer.
And two highly respected roles.
Yeah.
Isha for a medical doctor,
Okay.
and Arsh Gendusha for a researcher.
So if I were introducing myself formally as a researcher, I'd use that full, polite structure we've been building, something like, Watashi wa kenkyusha desu. Duzo yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Perfect. That's the ideal structure. You've got the safe pronoun, the neutral job title, and that essential relational closing. Flawless.
We also need to bring in the locations that give context to these jobs.
Right. If you're a gakusei, a student, you might be studying at a dayaku, a university. And our sources give some helpful examples like Sakana Daigaku or Fuji Daigaku, which helps you see how university names are structured.
And if you're an Isha, a doctor, you'd probably be working at a Waryun, a hospital.
Exactly. And finally, we have this sort of curious, random-seeming word in the beginner vocabulary list. Denki.
Meaning electricity or light.
Yeah, it seems like a bonus word that doesn't really fit the flow of a self-introduction.
I suspect it's there just because it's a super high-frequency word you hit right away in any beginner textbook. But how can we justify it for the learner so it feels immediately useful, even if it's not for the Jikashukai?
Well, the self-introduction is often immediately followed by simple, everyday questions. And Denki is fundamental to describing your environment. A phrase like, Denki o tsukamasu, I turn on the light. Or just needing to say, the office lights are off. You need this word.
So it's a pragmatic necessity.
It's a pragmatic necessity. Its inclusion just proves that the first phase of learning Japanese is kind of a vocabulary grab bag of foundational things, even if they aren't directly part of, hello, my name is. It's a survival word for a modern office or home.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered identity, social status, professional humility. Let's move to part 4, context and inquiry. This is about learning how to ask and answer questions about nationality and age while keeping that politeness level way up.
We can start by revisiting the word for country, which is arkuni. This is a great chance for the learner to practice combining those country names we talked about with the jin suffix.
Let's quickly run through the country names from the sources, just for practice. We have the phonetic loan words like America for the USA.
And Nigerisu for the UK.
Then there's Undo and Aran Indonesia. The way the sounds are adapted is pretty clear once you see the pattern.
It is. Then moving over to East Asia, we have Konkoku for South Korea.
And Aran Chugoku for China.
And Thai for Thailand. And then we have some European ones like Arn Deutsu for Germany.
And Forensu for France.
Rounding it out with Budajiru for Brazil. And of course, the native name Nihon for Japan.
The key thing here is just practice, right? Combine these with jin, Forensu jin, Budajiru jin, Nihon jin.
Exactly. You're not just memorizing a list. You're practicing a vital piece of grammar.
Okay, so that gives us the answers. Now we have to master asking the questions. And just like everything else we've discussed, asking questions means navigating a very specific politeness gradient.
And this is where we see that mandatory split again between the casual and the polite forms for the question words who and how old.
Let's start with who. The casual term is a dare.
And the polite form is donata.
So when is donata absolutely required? Let's say I'm talking to a receptionist at a very formal company and I see someone walk into the office. I need to ask who they are.
In that situation, donata is mandatory. using dare in a professional setting, or when you're talking to someone whose rank you don't know. It just comes across as aggressive,
Yeah.
abrupt, highly unprofessional.
So Janata has that deference built into it.
It does. You're essentially asking, to whom among these respectable people are you referring? It's not just softening the question. It's making sure your language matches the formal context. The vertical social structure demands it.
A good rule of thumb might be, if you feel like you should be using san after their name, you should probably be using donata to ask who they are.
That's a great way to think about it. And we see this exact same pattern again, maybe with even more social sensitivity, when we ask about age.
First, we have the age counter. Say, for years old.
And here's the split. The casual way to ask how old is neryananse.
And the required polite form is erefe, ohikutsu.
And this distinction is so important, and the learner really needs to understand why. In Japanese culture, knowing someone's age isn't just a biographical detail. It's a prerequisite for addressing them correctly for the rest of your life.
Because age is often what determines who is the senior, the senpai, and who is the junior, the kuhai.
Precisely. If you're talking to someone older than you, you are obligated to use a higher level of polite language, or keigo. If you don't know their age, you're just guessing, and guessing wrong can be a serious social blunder.
So because the answer to the question dictates the entire linguistic register you have to use from that point on, asking the question itself requires maximum politeness.
Right. Using the and I with an older person sounds way too direct, maybe even a bit challenging. It fails to acknowledge how sensitive that information is. You should always default to oikutsu unless you're talking to a small child or you have a very close established relationship.
The polite form is the required linguistic cushion.
It is.
That makes the rule really actionable. Always use oikutsu in professional settings.
Yes. And we need to pair these polite questions with the phrase that's like a linguistic shock absorber for any potentially intrusive question.
Sure. Chitsuri desu ga.
Excuse me, but.
Though the literal meaning is a bit stronger, isn't it? Something like, this is rude of me, but...
That's a much better translation. By acknowledging that your question might be an imposition asking for a name, a title, their age, you're proactively apologizing for the intrusion. It shows cultural humility.
And this phrase is useful way beyond just the self-introduction, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly versatile. If you need to interrupt a meeting, shitsure desu ga, chotto ii desu ka? Excuse me, but may I have a moment?
Or if you need to ask for clarification.
Exactly. Shitsure desu ga, mo ichido onegai shimasu. Excuse me, could you say that one more time, please? It's the mandatory buffer whenever you need to challenge, inquire, or interrupt respectfully.
It's the ultimate tool for navigating that politeness minefield we talked about.
It is. By starting with shitsure desu ga, you've basically bought yourself the right to ask the difficult question.
So to bring it all together, if I had to ask a question that required the absolute highest level of deference, say asking a senior executive their age, I would combine everything. Shitsure desu ga, oikutsu desu ka.
That is flawless. You've acknowledged the imposition, you've used the polite question word for age, and you've kept the formal tone throughout. Perfect.
And finally, to wrap up the vocabulary, the two most basic, essential, short responses for any conversation. Hi for yes.
And I for no.
Simple, but vital.
Absolutely. They let you clearly confirm or deny information within that polite context you've worked so hard to establish. It's worth noting that hi is also often used just to show you're listening. Not necessarily that you agree, but in this basic context, it's yes.
Okay. I feel like we've built the entire self-introduction structure from the ground up. We've gone from the essential greetings through the hierarchy of honorifics, the cultural need for humility, and the etiquette of asking questions. This really gives a learner both the words and the cultural why behind them.
This deep dive has really laid the foundation of Japanese communication. So let's just quickly summarize the key structural elements that the listener has to practice and internalize.
Okay, first, master the opening and the closing. Hajimemashite, and most importantly, duzo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. And understand that that last one is a relational contract for the future.
Second, prioritize avoiding that direct pronoun anata. Default instead to using their name with an honorific, or just omitting the subject altogether. That's fundamental to sounding polite.
Third, you have to internalize that humility split, especially the sensei versus kushi distinction for your own profession. That rule defines the entire mindset you need in a formal setting.
And fourth, always default to the polite forms when asking questions or referring to others. So anokata over anohito, donata over dare, and okutsu over nansai.
And always soften those questions with shitsure desu ga.
Exactly.
You've done the work of breaking down these complex rules. Now the goal is just practice, right? Practice them until they become automatic so that respect is just embedded in how you speak.
Mastering these first few words is what unlocks fluency. But more importantly, it unlocks respectful, effective communication. The knowledge we've pulled from these sources really gives a learner the cultural toolkit to avoid those early embarrassing mistakes.
Before we wrap up, we always like to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to reflect on until the next deep dive.
So, think about your own native language. How often does your language require you to make an explicit change in vocabulary? Not just your tone, but the actual word itself, just to refer to your own job or your age, depending on who you're talking to.
That exercise, that contrast, it really highlights the deep cultural implications that are baked into the basic vocabulary we've just unpacked. It makes Japanese feel less like just a set of words and more like a precise map of social relationships that you have to navigate correctly just to get in the door.
That's it, exactly. So keep practicing those basic introductions.
Yeah.
The fluency will follow the foundation.
Until then, stay informed.